Hi, I'm Cindy Maxwell-Ostdiek, and I'm one of the co-founders of the Nebraska Legislative Study Group. And I'm just really excited to be here this evening to talk with Nathan Leach. He is the director of the Nonpartisan Nebraska organization, and he's a rules enthusiast. And so we wanted to talk with him just a little bit about the upcoming legislative session that begins in January and what we can expect since it's the opening of a new session, and generally the legislature begins anew with their rules and how they function. And I know there's been a lot of concern and questions lately about how it might impact, the way committee chairs are elected and things like that. So I guess, Nathan, I thought I would just take a moment and ask you to kind of give us a little bit of an overview about, just super brief, the legislature and why this is an important topic, and then we can talk a little bit about the details. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I always appreciate the chance to talk about the legislative rules. In Nebraska, we have just a phenomenal legislature. It's a one-house body, and they pay very close attention to the process that they use. Part of that reason is because there's a unique philosophy that we adopted in 1934. Overwhelmingly, Nebraska voters voted in 1934 to institute this unicameral, and they also instituted this idea that it be nonpartisan. And so there's a couple of ways that ends up coming to fruition. You have the elections that are an open primary, a top two open primary, where all independents get to participate, and the top two vote getters proceed to the general. And then once lawmakers get to the Capitol building and get sworn in, they use a system of rules that we call nonpartisan. And what that means is there's no majority leaders, there's no minority leaders, there's no political caucuses. It's not like where, in a bicameral you have the speaker and they represent the majority party, and they just basically have power to appoint people to whichever committee. And in the legislature, it's very decentralized. It's based on this idea that every single state senator represents equally their constituents. And so we don't want to silence someone just because of their political party, because in our philosophy in the legislature, we're silencing 32,000 Nebraskans as a result. And so in practice with the rules, there's a couple of key different ways that they accomplish this. But one of the most relevant to our conversation this evening is the use of a ballot vote. In other legislatures, the political caucuses will meet and they choose, usually behind closed doors. And they go ahead.
I am so sorry because I don't want to interrupt, because I want you to pick that thought up in just one moment. But I'm going to just take a step back and let everyone know that this is the new biennium. We're going to start a new legislature here with this session in January. And the Nebraska legislature functions on a 2-year cycle. And so as the new senators come in that have just been elected and they're joined with the current senators, they will form a new session. And this process will help us find a new speaker. They will elect new committee chairs. They will administer and come up with their own rules, or, approve the previous rules, things like that. And the reason this is coming up is because it is a new session. I just wanted to kind of give people a little bit of an overview. Thanks, Nathan.
Yeah, and those officers that are elected, they serve for the 2 years. They call it, every new legislature gets a new number. And so this 2021 was the 107th legislature second session. And so we're coming into the 108th legislature first session. And then 2024 will be the 108th legislature second session. But this use of a ballot allows senators to elect leadership without there's no interference from the outside. No one can bully them to vote for a specific person, and it's really another part of it is because it's a small legislature with only 49 members, lawmakers have to work together issue by issue, and they have to form, coalitions and build positive relationships with one another. And so just like the city council uses a ballot, the county commissioners, just like you use a ballot in your local, organization or in a high school club. I mean, using a ballot is super common. It's how we vote at the ballot box as well for the same reason. You want to protect your relationship with other people and allow that vote to be, a genuine expression of who you think is best for the job.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's recently been a push to get rid of this secret ballot and go to a recorded vote. Usually there's
for electing the chair and the committee chairs as well as the speaker.
So they
election of the leadership for the legislature.
Exactly. Yeah. So they wouldn't have any ballot vote for this very specific thing that happens on the first day when they elect. Usually the arguments to do that are based on, they say that they're based on transparency, but in practice, it's really not a whole lot more transparent, because what ends up happening is before the election, the group, usually it gets broken down by party, go and they choose, okay, we're going to choose this person, we're going to choose this person, we're going to choose this person. And then you're expected to vote to, illustrate your loyalty to that club or that group of or slate of candidates. And if you don't, you've ruined your ability to have relationships with all these senators before the day has even, before the session even has begun.
Are you talking about what they would like to do versus
exactly. Yeah, this is
traditionally the legislature has not had these public.
Exactly. So that's how it works in other legislatures, and that's what there's been a push to do. And it really over the past 10 years, it's kind of gotten more and more folks have been trying to push, mostly I would say very partisan folks, who feel like they're upset because like one or two Democrats gets elected to a committee chair, and they're like, oh, well, we're a majority this party, and so how can you have this party in the chairmanship? And it's just a bunch of hooey, in my opinion. And part of the problem with it is our committee chairs are very administrative. They're nonpartisan in terms of their responsibilities to the legislature, which is not the case in other legislatures, where when you elect the speaker or you elect the committee chairs, they have the power to determine whether or not there's a committee hearing, the power to refer legislation. They have a very large impact on the public policy of the legislature, where in Nebraska, the committee chair has a little bit of an impact. They can schedule the time of some of these things, but comparatively, those elections really are based on the character and experience and ability of these folks to lead, not necessarily what their ideological expressions are. Mm-hmm. Now, there's a little bit of that influence, but comparatively, it's nothing like other legislatures. So anyway, yeah, so that's kind of the importance of that specific rule on the first day. And we may see an attempt to try and change that rule January 4th when the legislature meets. If there isn't a push on that first day, as the legislature comes along, they're going to be addressing the rules kind of that first 2-3 weeks of the session. And so you may hear some discussion about the secret ballot specifically. There may be some discussion about trying to change the filibuster or other elements of the rules. And it's really important that we be watchful of these changes, because they have a huge influence, not just on the coming legislative session, but these rules impact generations of lawmakers and generations of Nebraskans as a result. When you change the rules of the legislature, as someone who's gone back and looked at the rules from 1937 and in the 80s and just done a lot of research with these rules, once a rule changes, I mean, it doesn't really change back very often. It's very difficult for these changes to, once you make the change, it's you're kind of stuck with it unless you really have the ability to just really advocate for a change. So if they're successful, it's going to be, we want to make sure that any changes are thought out and they're genuinely good changes for the legislature and not being made just to, benefit one party over the other, or just for short-term policy gains. So anyway, I'll stop ranting about that, but I'm happy to answer any questions about it.
Sure. Well, and I guess sometimes it's difficult, these topics, we start getting into the weeds as opposed to more of an overview. And I think it's just really important to stress to everybody how lucky we are that we live in Nebraska and we have our nonpartisan unicameral structure of government.
Mhm.
It means that we are more directly, our representation is as close as possible to us, to our lives and our livelihoods, these people making the decisions on our behalf. And the unicameral, because it is only one house, relies on everyday Nebraskans to take up their responsibility as the second house and to help the senators to make sure that they're implementing the best laws for our state and for everybody that it impacts. So when we talk about how the legislature is nonpartisan, a lot of people think, well, what do you mean? Of course, people are members of parties and things like that. Well, there's some people like me. I'm an actual independent. I'm registered nonpartisan. But most of the senators do belong to a political party. But the function of the legislature is not to be at the beholden to political party. Each senator is their own representation of their district. And the unique thing about the legislature is that they can take care of their own rules, make sure that they elect the best people to be chairs of these committees. And I remember going to the first day a couple years ago when they were doing elections, and it's a fascinating process on the first day. And if we lived in a state where it was based on majority, like say Congress or other states where they have two houses, the majority just makes assignments, basically. And here in Nebraska, the great thing is that the legislature can use their judgment and elect the best person to be in charge of that particular committee. And I know I was talking with you recently and asked how long it's been that Nebraska has been represented by a majority of one party. I think it's been Republican majority for at least how many decades? Quite a few.
I actually have no idea.
I think
it's hard because we don't really the clerk's office doesn't really keep track of that. And I don't necessarily pay a whole lot of attention to the partisan makeup of the body over time. But I mean, it's been predominantly Republican for a long time.
Yeah.
Just because of the nature of our state.
But we've had members elect chairs of committees from the other party.
Mm-hmm.
Who were very expert at the committee that they were chairing. And they were able to do that because they didn't have these public votes where they might be bullied into voting only someone from their own party. And I know that the process has been very different this year because I know that the candidates who were running, as well as incumbents, were sent actual pledge forms to sign, whether, they would be voting one way or another. And I think that hopefully these senators are really looking into why it's important,
And that pledge is a pledge to change the rule to how partisan bicamerals do it with a roll call vote rather than this nonpartisan written ballot that we've used. Is that right?
Yeah. And it's just not, it won't serve our state well. It's just not long term. So people, they talk about with transparency or, you know, the votes that our senators make on our behalf regarding the laws are public. When they're voting for their own leadership within the legislature, they do that privately and independently. And it served our state very well for, back to when George Norris.
Yeah, almost 90 years now.
Yes. And this is my plug. I know there's like a shadow, but this book called The One House, The Unicameral's Progressive Vision for Nebraska, written by Charlene Behrens, is something that we have in the legislative study group. We have we have a lending library, but you can also order it. And it is just amazing background in history with George Norris and how this whole unicameral came about. I know that one thing I'll put in the chat or the description box is a link to the Nebraska legislature website so that everyone can go and find your senator. There have been a lot of changes since this, with the census and redistricting. Some people live in different districts than they previously did. And then, of course, we've had recent elections. And so everyone's going to want to make sure and pull up who their current senator is and make sure and get in touch with them and let them know how important this is to you, that we maintain the nonpartisan nature of the legislature so that it can best represent everybody in our state and not just, a particular political party. That's exactly. My 2 cents.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. It's so important. I worked as a page in the Arizona State Senate for a semester back in 2016. And it was shocking to me to watch just how everything that lawmakers did depended on the R or the D next to their name. Mm-hmm. And coming from Nebraska and watching how we do things, watching the legislature in high school and into college, and then going to Arizona and seeing that, it really took my breath away, because so often in Nebraska, a bill comes up, it's controversial. You actually get to sit there and listen to lawmakers go on the floor and talk about this issue in depth, ask each other questions, have a dialogue. As a member of the public, you learn something from it. And I will say that it's the quality of debate recently has, over the last couple of years, has certainly gone down. But even compared to what it is now to how it was, for example, in Arizona, where, the minority might stand up and say, try and say, don't do this. And then the majority leader just stands up and says, I oppose this amendment, and sits down, and that's it. There's nobody cares. They know what the votes are. There's no dedication to the legislatures are deliberative bodies. That's why we have them. We send people there to debate and to deliberate and to reason with each other and to represent constituents. But far too often, when you see legislatures today, like you watch Congress, how many times have you ever watched Congress and seen any person more than just the person on the floor talking to the empty chamber? Those lawmakers aren't deliberating. Everyone else is out fundraising while so-and-so has the floor and has a speech that he hopes he might be able to get a small clip of so that it can, help his reelection. It's really quite a joke. And so it's really astonishing when you look at Nebraska and you see these lawmakers, have that dedication and have, an actual, asking each other questions and having a real quality debate about issues. It's something that's really valuable. And I think it's important to say that the quality of that has gone down with term limits. But the reason we are able to even get close to that is because of our dedication to a nonpartisan system where mm-hmm. all senators have, the ability to represent, to speak, to offer amendments, the nonpartisan ballot votes that they use, and not using a partisan organization. It's really quite an astonishing system, and I hope that we can keep it going and have it as something that we can give to even more generations of Nebraskans.
Well, and I know we just wanted to have kind of a brief discussion about this, but there will be a lot of exciting kind of news coming out about this at the beginning of the legislature. And I'm going to put a link here on the page to our legislative study group. And just, people can find more information about how to study the legislature and information for people to, kind of learn more about the process. And I also would like to link to Nonpartisan Nebraska. What is the website, Nathan?
It's npnebraska.org.
npnebraska.org. Okay. And it'd be great if people would, make sure and put these into your, put them in your phone so that you can find that easily. And that way, when it comes time for the legislature to begin, we can, make sure and inform everybody. And I know that I'm hoping the senators will all use their higher ideals and really take seriously their responsibility to the state and to everybody that they represent, all their constituents. I know that I'll be reaching out to my new senator and letting him know how important I think this is, that he would be representing my family and that this is something I would want him to seriously consider. So hopefully people will follow through with that. And if they have more questions, they can certainly get in contact.
Absolutely. Yep.
Thanks so much, Nathan.
Yeah. And if anyone has any specific questions about the rules, I know it can feel kind of complicated. My email is nathan@npnebraska.org, and I'd be happy to give you some resources or answer any questions.
Great. Well, thanks again. And we'll see you after the first of the year. Happy New Year.
Yep. Thank you very much.
Thanks.